All right, welcome everybody. It's 1:45. I'm ready to get started here. I'm Kevin Knutson, and I'm on your board of directors. And I get the great honor of introducing today's speakers on strategic planning, which is something that's near and dear to my heart. Been a big part of my career, something that I've really felt was important. And in fact, we had a session here a few years back. I just saw Dr. Mitchell here, where he did a presentation on how difficult it is to actually implement strategy and how few cities actually do it. And so we're here today to find out how to bridge that gap, how to get past that inertia that we all have and turn our strategic plans into reality. Our two speakers today are Donna Bradbrook, who began work with Alachua County in 2007 as the Strategic Performance Manager. She has over 3 decades of local government service in Florida, including working for Broward County, the Palm Beach County Sheriff's Office, and the Palm Beach County Clerk and Comptroller's Office in areas such as accounting and budgeting, human resources, facilities, organizational development, and library operations. Next to her is Joe Krause. He graduated from Seton Hall University with a BA in political science. His first master's degree is in healthcare communication from Boston University, and the second is an MBA with a concentration in finance from Rutgers. Recently, he completed the Google Project Management Certification Program with the intention of sitting for his PMP this year. And while doing all those different academic things, he managed to start a new company called AchieveIt, which he's been doing for over 10 years and has helped execute thousands of strategical, operational, and project plans. So join me in welcoming them, and we look forward to hearing what they have to say.
And so good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining on a Friday afternoon. As you can imagine, I woke up last night in a cold sweat thinking nobody would be here, and I appreciate every one of you for being here, and hopefully the reward is a interesting presentation that you'll be able to use on Monday back at your roles to bridge the gap that was just mentioned. And thank you for the wonderful introduction, and just to throw it on the screen, and I'm going to let Donna also speak to a few things. Ultimately, I hope you'll find today to be a focus on the pragmatic. So there's great things related to strategic planning and performance management that sometimes lives in the ether. What we're going to be talking about today is once you've had a good set of ideas that you decided, like, here's the direction we want to go, how do we then operationalize it so that we can actually execute the plan? So I hope you'll find some fresh ideas. My background, as mentioned, I've been doing this for a very long time. And so my job today is to bring in the experience that I've had with working with great clients from Florida, but also across the country, internationally, you name it. There's a lot of things that are similar and different, and it's my hope to be able to highlight that for you today. But also, I'm joined by Donna, who's from Alachua County. I want to give her a moment to also expand a little bit on her background.
Great, thank you. And I want to thank you guys for inviting me to be here to speak. I always enjoy talking about Alachua County and the successes that we've had over the years, especially in performance management and strategic planning. So just to give you a little bit more background about myself, in addition to the 32 years I've worked in local government operations in the state of Florida, specifically in Alachua County, I work in operational performance management, performance reporting, operational auditing, and I coordinate the Alachua County Citizens Academy, which just concluded a week ago. And as the Alachua County Systems Administrator for the AchieveIt Performance Management System, I ensure the continued alignment of our operational measures within our strategic guide and our strategic focus areas. Important to our county is the transparency that we reflect to our citizens. So a lot of what we do publish either on our website, through our transparency website, or our budget documents. And we want to track and report on our key performance measures and make sure that we are showing our progress towards our strategic guide in all of our communications with the public.
Excellent. And thank you, Donna. And just to highlight what was just mentioned, our learning objectives are pretty simple today. Each of these is action-packed with a lot of great, hopefully, information that you can use. But we're going to start our conversation around the importance of strategic plans. I know every single one of you knows that a strategic plan is something that you should have, but as Kevin mentioned, the execution of that plan is the part that sometimes is difficult. It's the whole reason why I got into this field, was that it was very apparent to me that most organizations have a very good sense of what they should focus on. The issue is what happens 3 months down the road, 6 months down the road, et cetera. A year can go by in a blink of an eye, as we've all probably experienced. And if somebody were to tap you on the shoulder 6 months down the road into a new plan, and they ask you how thing number 3 is doing, it shouldn't take an act of Congress to give them an answer, because ultimately that means the plan's not being tracked in the most effective way. So the importance will be highlighted, and my goal is to provide you with some statistics that would allow you in your role or to convince somebody back at home about why they should be doing this. Then we're going to be talking about what you need to do to take maybe what you have currently and get it ready for execution. There are 5 elements every strategic plan should have, regardless of industry or organization. They're very simple things, but as you can imagine, with the simple, some things can get complex. So my job is to show those 5, give you some examples, and you can literally go back to your plan on Monday, apply those, and you'll be in a much better spot. And last but not least, how do you make sure that you align your goals and your results to drive outcomes? Many folks that I work with over the last decade do a fine job sometimes of tracking activity in their plan. So at the end of the year, their review looks like a to-do list that was accomplished. But when you ask them which outcomes were driven by those results, it's usually a much cloudier conversation. So the hope is that at the end of your planning cycle, it's more of a math equation versus more of an exercise in how you feel. Sometimes we say, we had a great year, look at all the stuff we got done. I think we all probably can relate to that sensation. But the goal here is how can we could say we did these select things, it had these outcomes, therefore we had a great year. And once again, sounds simple, but it is complex. And the goal here is to make sure there's always a connection between the activities that you're doing and the money that you're spending and some sort of outcome that benefits the people that you serve. So we'll start with the most macro and get down to the most granular. And we have a great case study here of Alachua County that has done a fantastic job of taking their strategic guide, operationalizing it, and using it to make decisions based on what they're seeing in the plan data. If there's a number that's off, how do we then go and make sure we address that problem? And I hope you'll enjoy that as well. As far as questions go, throughout here, I'm going to pause here and there. It would be ideal, and we're all friends. You can shout out your answers if you have. You can save them to the end, but the goal here is whatever you're most comfortable with, it would be helpful. But since we all can learn from each other, let's talk about the importance of strategic planning. I know some of you are convinced, maybe some of you are not convinced. Some of you are like, listen, I have a lot of jobs in my current position, and strategic planning sounds great, but it's probably job 20 of 20. My job is to hopefully maybe move it up to the top 3. Let's see if I'm successful in that. Because I'm passionate about it, because organizations that do this effectively are the strongest organizations. Those that don't do this so well are the ones that maybe let opportunities pass them by. And the studies that back this up, and hopefully supported by our friends in academia that are here, is that less than 10% of the strategies that organizations set out to do actually get executed. So if you had 100 things on your to-do list, this means after a year, or whatever the period of performance is, 90 didn't get accomplished, 10 were accomplished. I think we all can agree that math's pretty sad, and that's not a number we'd all be super happy with. That 10% doesn't mean that work isn't getting done. This is not an insinuation that anybody's feet is up on the desk and everybody's sitting there and just not getting work done. It's usually the operational work that's getting done. And there's a reason for that. Operational work is stuff that needs to get done today or sometimes yesterday. And people are really going to be hitting you up on email or chasing you down the hallway to get there. This 10% strictly talks to the stuff that has a more medium to long-term time horizon. So ultimately, those are the things that if you only have so much time in the day, those are the ones that you maybe put off until tomorrow. And so if 10% is what this study found, does anybody feel like that's an accurate statement where you're like, it's 10% or lower? Show our hands, 10% or lower. What have we seen? See a couple hands. What about 20 to 50%? Show of hands. What do we got? One back here. 50 to 70% of things getting done. I like it. Overachiever. 70 to 100. Anybody have 100? They get everything done all the time? If so, we're going to study you afterwards. I think we all can agree, though, there could be more done. There could be, at the end of the year, there's always stuff left on the table that potentially could have been done better if there was a better focus on it. So just know that 10% number is the sad number. The happy number is the second one, which is 70% of the time, the strategies that you've developed are fantastic. They just need to be executed. If somebody were to ask me the biggest challenge that I've seen over the course of time in strategic planning, what would it be? Plans are too big. Your plans are too big. I'm telling you, I don't even seen your plans and I know they're too big. It's just typically they're big because we think a strategic plan should be a collection of good ideas, because it's a wonderful thing. People give you a good idea and we put it into the plan. But our capacity to execute is only about yay big. There's only so much we can fit in there. So when your plan has 500, 600, 700 items in it, which I see a lot in every industry, your plan was doomed from the start. So a smaller, leaner plan is a feature, not a bug. Sometimes people feel that it's the opposite. Last year, I presented an 800-item plan. I can't walk in there with a 200-item plan. You could, and you should, because that's a plan that actually is going to get executed. there was a study conducted by Boston Consulting Group, and they looked to see, I should say, is there a connection between high levels of organizational performance and high levels of strategic execution? And lucky for all of us, they found there was a direct connection. And they found that the organizations that executed around 70% of what they set out to do were best in class. All organizational metrics that show health were the best in class if they executed, on average, 70% of what they set out to do. So if you think about that for a moment, that means that Mount Everest isn't as big as it just was a moment ago. 100% is not the goal. It's not realistic. A strategic plan is something that you're sitting in a room and you're thinking about the future. The future is this opaque thing that you're trying to make a little bit more clear. You're not going to get everything right. And some people fear that so much that they just throw everything in the plan and hope for the best. The goal here is that your plan is the best you can put together, and then you reserve the right to make changes over time. That 30% that doesn't get done might be the result of you canceling a few items. You may have said this initiative that we're working on is fantastic in January. June comes rolling around, new priorities, new budget. That's no longer that great of an idea. Maybe we should cancel it and shift that money somewhere else. And we actually have a great example of that later in the presentation. Some people fear that conversation. I am asking you to invite it. The healthiest organizations are the ones that are constantly looking at their plan, identifying what's working, and putting more money or more effort towards them. And the ones that are having a struggle are the ones that don't do that. And at the end of the year, your plan should not look exactly the way it did in the beginning, because you're going to have new information, new updates, new everything. Your plan should be in wet cement, not dry cement. All right? So any questions on that at all? Anything so far around these numbers? Anything that has been strikes a chord? So this is the main macro problem. And the reason why this is so difficult is not because that you're all super talented at what you do. It's just that it's challenging because it involves people. And not only does strategic planning involve people, it involves a lot of people. So every extra person you add to the process makes it more complex. But there was a bit of research conducted by Duke University that talked about leading from the center, strategy professionals. How could they be the most effective strategy professionals they can be? And what they found was that every organization, regardless of industry, typically has three major roles that live in that org. And each of those three need to do their thing in the space that I'm mentioning here. And ultimately what that's going to allow for is the strategic plan and the execution to be effectively communicated. If one of these three are not doing their job, the whole process could potentially break down. So I'm going to highlight the three. You might see yourself in one of the three. You'll go, I'm one of those. I'm all three of those. That might be the case too. The goal is, though, is that you are operating as one of the three roles when you're doing specific activities, not trying to do all of it at once. And those three roles are the architect, the translator, and the doer. So the architect on the far left, this is a very difficult job. This is somebody who is at usually a leadership role, senior leadership role. That's the person who's the office of no. That's the person who should be the office of no. If they're not doing their job, they're the office of yes. But basically, this is the person that has to field all the great ideas that exist out there in the ether. Because strategic planning, you are doing stakeholder feedback, you're talking to folks, and they're going to have no shortage of good things to talk about. The architect has to say, we can't focus on 40, we can only focus on 4. And when you break down 40 to 4, there's going to be a lot of hurt feelings. And some people sometimes want to avoid that hurt feelings conversation, and the plan becomes an 800-item plan. And that is not what we're identifying with. So the architect has to be very clear about what are we focused on, and equal parts, what are we not going to focus on. A strategic plan sometimes only gets the real conversation going about what made the cut, but sometimes it's good to also talk about what trade-offs were made and what didn't make the cut. And at least people know that they were acknowledged. We're not working on that great idea that Amy came up with, and here's why. We hope to revisit it next cycle. And that keeps people engaged. And then usually when you frame it that way, the architect is able to do their thing. We have the translator in the middle. That's the person who takes those 4 or 5 things that the architects created and then makes it into an actual plan, makes it into a work breakdown structure. Who's working on it, by when, how are we going to measure it? They're the one that's usually making the plan. And that's a challenging role because they're usually doing that with limited authority. There's not even a solid line and very rarely a dotted line responsibility matrix. It's just, hey, I need you to do this. They're using their power of influence versus their power of direct power over someone. And so their job is to take what the architect came up with and make it into something that we all know looks like a plan. And that is challenging across the board. And last but not least, the doer. I'm sure we all are maybe doers on Tuesdays and Fridays, an architect on Monday, a translator on Wednesday, but the doer is somebody who's actually doing the work. And that's somebody who needs to know why they're doing the work. Sometimes people are asked to do extra things and they have no clue why they're doing it. Achievement rates are really in the toilet if you don't know why you're doing something. The Project Management Institute found that if you cannot connect your work to a greater meaning in the strategic plan, there's only a 42% chance of that work getting done. Conversely, if you can say, I'm doing this to impact this measure, I'm doing this to impact this goal, 73% chance of that work getting done. So when you have a good strategic plan, the doer better know why they're doing things, because if they don't, typically achievement rates are not where they need to be. So those are the three as a general rule. Then we have the challenges that exist for each of them, as you can imagine. The architect's job is to manage those competing priorities, which I touched upon already. They have to communicate the strategy. Sometimes they're good at maybe doing that twice a year. The average person needs to see something around 8 to 9 times before they actually remember what you said. So if you're showing the strategic plan 2 or 3 times a year, you're nowhere getting close to 9 times. So the goal here is that the architect is constantly showing the plan, either making it a slide in a presentation template or having town halls or whatever that needs to look like. But that plan needs to be there early and often, put in the onboarding package, things like that, so that when people start to see the plan, they'll say, this plan must be important, I'm seeing it a lot. That's the point. That's the architect's job, and sometimes they don't do the best job with that. The translator has to herd a bunch of cats, right? The strategic plan is now resourced to all these different people. I need to get status updates from them. It's a real challenge. Anytime you get north of 20 people, it's a real challenge. Even if you're using email, Excel, PowerPoint, and those things, you're chasing. And if you chase for long enough, you get tired. And if you get tired, the plan's not going to be updated, and then you have no clue how it's doing, and it goes right back on the shelf to collect dust. So the translator has to have that strength and resolve to show that not only the plan being created is the starting gun. For a lot of organizations, that's the finishing line. They go, I made the plan, what else do you want from me? That's when the work begins, and it's the translator's job to make sure that's the case. And last but not least, the doer has to do, and so you have to hold them accountable to doing it. I know the keynote presentation yesterday was all about accountability. That's what the doer's main job is, to make sure they're accountable not only to getting the work done, but accountable to making regular and timely updates on the plan. If I give you a year to do something, I don't want to hear in month 11 that it's off the rails, especially if you knew in month 4. So the goal here is that we get mini states of the union over the course of the year, so that if the doer has a barrier, the translator or the architect can remove the barrier. Nothing worse than going 11 months into the year and getting sidelined in month 12 because a bunch of stuff went off the rails. So the doer has to be empowered to have those things. And I know, Donna, you wanted to touch upon how these roles appear in Alachua County.
Yes, and to combine both the last slide and this slide, a lot of times the situation that you have with ineffective strategy execution does actually reside with the players in the process. Specifically in Alachua County, in our situation, our architect is who? It is our policymakers, our Board of County Commissioners, our manager, our county manager, and our executive leadership. So you probably experienced similar situations. What right now is the average tenure of a city or county manager in the state of Florida? It's a pretty short tenure. So if you're looking at something like we're in the process of a major infrastructure implementation having to do with roads and broadband and stuff like that, if our county manager is only here 3 to 5 years, is that the length of time it's going to take us to implement 200 miles of roadway improvements? Probably not. So one thing we face is turnover in our elected officials, turnover in our managers, and our executive leadership. What else happens at the architect level? Do they change policy direction? Do they allocate budget or not allocate budget? I'll give you an example. In Alachua County, this is one of our infamous failures. We needed a major north-south roadway repaved. That need started in 1999. We allocated the budget for it. We hired the architects and engineers. We started the design process. A little while later, we get the design process back to our Board of County Commissioners, and what do? They reject it. They don't like it. It's not fancy enough. It's not reflective of what they want Alachua County to look like for a major thoroughfare. They send it back to the drawing board. Happens again, happens again. Finally, we get back a really nice plan, roundabouts, landscaping, all of that really good stuff with a hugely inflated estimated budget. When did we get that plan back? It was close to 2011. What happened then? The recession, the economic downturn. Then we didn't have the tax money to pay for the inflated project. So what did we do? Our board sent it back to the architects and engineers again. Pared it down. Then we were in the middle of a recovery. They sent it back to beef it back up. Well, I'm proud to say that as of 2019, almost 20 years later, that roadway has been repaved. And it's pretty much a combination of what we started with and the inflated and the deflated. And so now we have a paved roadway, but it took 20 years for that process to go through because the architects, either by choice, changed their mind, or by necessity, because of tax revenues, had to change their mind. Then we have the translators. I consider myself in this diagram a translator. As the strategic performance manager, having been at Alachua County 16 years now, I'm the consistent voice. So regardless of who is our elected official, regardless of who is our manager, and there was a period of time where I had a new manager every year for 5 years straight. Try to keep that consistent message going to, your frontline workers. We also have our working managers, those managers who oversee our departments and programs. Those are our translators. They try to keep that consistent message going even when the architecture may be changing. But what are some of the problems we have with translators? We have an inconsistent message. We have managers who basically consider a strategic planning process to be a bureaucratic roadblock to what they want to get done. They basically consider it a lot of paperwork and something they don't need to do. So getting them on board with this process is also incredibly important to have effective strategy implementation. And then the doers. These are really the most important people in the process because they have to understand how important they are in getting the strategy executed. They are the ones that are helping to implement the contracts, oversee the consultants, actually do the work to see that vision come to fruition. So these are all parts of the process. So as Joe mentioned, where do you see yourself in this process? And I do have to say the fact that the room is as full as it is, which I do have to say is surprising for 2 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. So I do congratulate you for being here and sticking it out with us. Where do you see yourselves in this process? Do you see yourself as an architect?
Couple.
Translator? Doer? How about all of the above? Definitely.
Yeah, and the point that's made there is that every one of these roles is equally important. Sometimes the glamour is, well, the architect's the most important and the doer's just doing. Each of these is equally important. Any of these are missing or not empowered to do their job, the whole process breaks down. So the goal here is if you do find yourself being in multiple roles, if you're saying I'm doing architect work, think like an architect. Think about making the tough decisions, and a good lean plan at the end of the day is better than a robust, crazy plan that never had a chance to get there. A translator's job is to make sure the plan actually is ready to be executed. For you translators out there, the next section is about the 5 elements every plan should have. That's going to be your secret weapon going forward, because if you apply those 5 to whatever you're doing, it'll make you a much more effective translator. And the doer has to make sure they understand why they're working on their items, and if they are making status updates on a regular basis, they have to know they're not shouting into the void. A lot of times we ask for status updates for folks, and then it never actually gets put into any presentation or dashboard, and they're like, well, why am I even doing this? I have other ways to spend my time. So make sure you reward the doer by not only showing their performance, but there's a great opportunity to put people up on pedestals to say, look at this fantastic work this person did. It makes them then buy into the plan. It's our plan, not your plan. And that's a wonderful way to get the doers involved. So the architect hands to the translator, to the doer, and then back, goes like this. And if they're not doing their job, the process breaks. But as you can imagine, these are the people. And then if you probably were to look at like how the plans actually then take shape and how they form, it becomes this interconnected web of plans and Excel and PowerPoint and Word documents that you probably all have nightmares about. This is pretty common where the goals you create then turn into objectives, and then the departments have to do what they need to do, and then they make action plans, and well, before you know it, if you have 15 departments, there's 77 Excel documents on different drives, and we have no centralized place for it. And if this becomes the process, no wonder people rebel against it and not do it, or they think about it as a process not worth their time, because this is a challenge if you're operating in this silo. And ultimately, these are some of the challenges that exist in that world. The inconsistent communication I mentioned already. Communicate more than you think you should. A lot of organizational research, you go to business school, they give you these organizational research and organizational behavior classes, and it's always pretty funny because orgs don't behave, right? They kind of do their own thing, but they always impressed upon us that you have to, as leaders, communicate 3x more than you instinctually think you should for your message to be received. So what that feels like is that you're about to tell somebody or remind them something, and you pull back and go, but I just told them that. They're going to think I'm being whatever. Tell them again. They didn't ignore you. They just probably didn't really have it seep in. So the goal here is to push through that weird feeling we have sometimes where you're saying, I already told that person this, or I already showed them the plan. Show it again. It's not going to hurt them, and it's going to then make it much more of a process. If there's limited alignment, ultimately, if you don't know why you're working on something, and if there is no uniformity in the planning process, that's a real problem from the start. Cannot stress enough that uniformity is number 2 on my list of reasons why plans fail. Number 1 is they're too big. Number 2 is lack of uniformity. If you create an Excel template and say, fill it out, departments, and you send it out, you have a template, you think, I think I'm good, and I have a template, right? You send it out to 15 departments, congratulations, you now have 16 templates. They will change the template. They will mess up with your formula, they will send it back, they'll delete rows, they'll create errors, and then ultimately makes your job that much more difficult. So you have to find a way that's much more uniform, and if people are all planning in the same way, it makes it very easy then to get status updates. But as soon as you have micro versions of the plan, it's not going to work. Poor visibility, accountability, don't get me started on that one, but many times people will have a plan and they'll say, here are the 4 people working on this. From an accountability perspective, if you assign 4 people, you're in essence assigning nobody. We know that, right? Remember group projects in grad school, undergrad, high school, what have you? A teacher announced a group project, every single person collectively groaned. Right? There's the old joke that when I die, I want my group members from grad school to be my pallbearers so they can let me down one last time, right? It is something that we all can relate to. So ultimately, if you remember from school too, it was always hard to do group projects because nobody knew who the accountable party was. So in a good plan, you have to be very descriptive to say, these 4 people are working on it, but here's the person who's going to be giving status updates on it. Here's the person who's going to stand up and say, here's how we did. That sometimes seems challenging, but if you are able to do that, eliminate the 5 people assigned to something and make it 1, magical things start to happen. So I just want to make sure I make that clear. And if you make this a manual process, it's slow and people will rebel. And sometimes it's pretty nuts, the reporting cycle. Let's say you want quarterly updates on your strategic plan. I had clients that would close the quarter, make a strategic planning update. It would take them 6 weeks to get everybody's updates. Another 2 weeks to create a dashboard. They're basically the next quarter. And so the data's old, they can't make decisions on it. If you want monthly updates, you should have an update within a couple days of month close or quarter close. Because the whole point here is to get data that you can use to make decisions. And if that data's old, really hard to make a decision on old data. So the goal here is that there's a better way, and we'll explain what that looks like. I know that Donna's going to touch upon this concept a little bit later and how this actually looks in Alachua County. So keep this image in your mind. And ultimately, strategic planning is a change management exercise. Everything you do. If you change the location of a bathroom, people are going to still go in the wrong direction probably 15 times before they remember, oh yeah, we moved it. So if you talk about a strategic plan, in theory, it's a bunch of changes. So you have to be very clear that ultimately people are a little bit nervous about change unless you kind of figure out how you can relate it to what makes it important to them. The problem with change management is that people think of it as a one-dimensional thing. And in my experience, I've noticed that it's really 2. The first side here, the change management, is the what. So what system are we going to use? Excel. What process are we going to use? We're going to make quarterly updates. What structure are we going to use? We're going to put it into a performance framework. And what's our strategy? Okay, what are we going to focus on during our plan? People are pretty generally good at this. They do a nice job. They get into a strategic planning session and they figure this out. But the part that's sometimes overlooked is the second part, the how. Let's say you are successful with getting those updates once a month and you get it back and somebody marks something red. Everybody's scared of red, right? Red is the scary color that keeps us up at night. If you were in school and you had a bad grade on a math test, teacher would slide it over face down, right? And you knew what was under there, a big red F, right? We're scared of red, but in a strategic planning process, it's encouraged that people will mark in their plan what is going well and what's not going well. If a plan is green all the time, it's a big circle of green, it is a watermelon, green on the outside, red on the inside. There are problems always happening with the plan. What separates good from great organizations is not their ability to be perfect at execution, it's their ability to spot problems before they become bigger problems. So that how is all about the culture of how you facilitate that. If you say red isn't a problem, and then somebody makes something red and you browbeat them, or a trap door falls out beneath you and they fall in, or there's alligators in there, that's going to make people not do this. Ultimately, if you're thinking about barriers in your plan, treat them as such. I'm raising my hand because the item I'm working on has encountered a barrier and I need your help to remove it. It's not an indictment on my personal character that this thing that I thought was a good idea isn't going so well. It's usually not, it's really very rarely due to gross negligence, I promise you. It's usually because they need your help. What happens if somebody's not making their updates on time? How do you handle that? How do you make sure that people know that we are all agreeing to this construct and I need your participation? These are the types of leadership conversations that need to be there, and people need to know that the principals in the office, most people will follow this process, but there will be 10% that no matter what you put in front of them, they will never do it. If you think of an organization as the beautiful standard deviation, the bell curve, the left tail, far left side would be the 10% of the organization that no matter what you put in front of them, they hate it. Free beer and ice cream on Friday, they hate beer and ice cream. They hate puppies, they hate rainbows, they hate everything. Those are the people that are over there. Then you have 10% on the other side that are awesome, change agents, people that no matter what you ask them, they have a good attitude about it and they run through a wall. You give them a big hug, those are the people that make your life easy. That leaves the 80% in the middle, and they could be swayed by either 10%. And with the management, sometimes we look at the people that are the squeaky wheel and like, I'm gonna convince that person to like ice cream, they're gonna love it, I promise. And we put all our energy there. I hate to break it to everybody, those people can't be changed. So focus your attention on the 10% that are doing great work, prop them up, and the 80% will follow their lead. And that's what that whole how aspect is all about. So just not just getting status updates on your plan, it's how you use those updates to make decisions and drive culture. I know, Donna, you wanted to talk about that as well.
Yeah, and in just a really pragmatic way, I would like anybody to raise their hand who has had no change in their organization in the past 10 years. Elected officials, managers, department managers, budget, staffing. How about 5 years? 1 year? How about 1 month? I'm lucky if I go 1 day without something changing significantly in my organization. So as Joe was mentioning, that 80% that's in the middle, part of it is clear, consistent communication with those people in the middle. Change is going to occur. Sometimes it's bad, sometimes it's good, but you know what? We can all effectively manage it. And part of that is clear, consistent over-communication with your staff to talk about your strategy, why it's important, and how you're going to do it, whether there's change or not. Let's keep moving in a forward, positive direction.
Consistency is key. It's always the case. Anybody that I know that have a couple family members that were struggling to get into, let's say, college, and they finally got there, and they get there that first day, and they come back and they go, I'm so excited. I love my professors, and maybe they've had a history of quitting things in the past. And I say, just capture that feeling of that first time, and make sure that in month 6, when it's not as fun as it used to be, that you continue along. Because you will hit some bumps with this, but the goal here is that the consistency stays there. And the goal here is that you have a pulse check on your plan. I'll put it out there at least monthly. Monthly is the ideal, especially for a strategic plan, but a good backslide would be quarterly. But ultimately, that's the North Star here, is that if you have 12 updates to your plan a year, you should be able to spot trends and make decisions based on it and impact outcomes. Anything less than that, you're going to let the outcomes kind of do their thing. And people start to talk like the old adage, we'll just see how it goes. If people say, let's just see how it goes, they know how it's going to go. And last but not least, the beautiful, what presentation would be complete without a Venn diagram? But the best organizations in the world are the ones that have effectively managed and found great people that care about the plan. Those people created a good plan, not even a great plan, and definitely not a perfect plan. There is no such thing as a perfect plan. The reason why I know some of you might believe that is that I've seen organizations spend 8 months out of 12 months building a plan. A 1-year plan that takes 8 months to build. Makes no sense, right? So that to me speaks to the idea of the perfect plan, which once again, does not exist. Create a plan with the elements we're about to cover and reserve the right to change based on new information, and that's a good enough thing. And last but not least, what's our process for making updates and making decisions based on those updates? If you had a bad year or a bad week, month, or even a year, like friends would say, usually it's the culprit is one of these 3 things. Sometimes all 3, sometimes 2 out of 3. So if you're looking at your last year and say, yeah, we really didn't do that great on the plan, or we don't have one, it's usually the culprit's one of these 3 things.
So let me ask, how many of you work for a county agency? And for a city agency? Okay, so most of you work for a city. How many of you have a strategic plan again? Okay. What's the worst thing you can do with your strategic plan? It looks beautiful. It's in a great 3-ringed binder. What do you do with it? You put it on a shelf and you do nothing with it. That's the worst thing you can do. But you do have to have all 3 parts. You have to have the people, the process, and the plan to make it all work. So ineffective management of those 3 is going to result in failure of strategy. And that is really kind of the keystone to Alachua County's success in our strategic planning process, is recognizing the process, the people, and the plan equally as contributing to the success.
Absolutely. And the whole reason why this is important is that if you do this effectively, you will have, and that little line is a little bit faint, pointing to the middle of the Venn diagram there, you will have a stronger and more valuable organizational position. You'll be able to do more, serve more, do all those wonderful things that make you the best at what you do. That's the stakes here. Because ultimately, if a strategic plan is not in place and it's not looked at, you may see success in the short term. There's no doubt. Plenty of organizations operate without a strategic plan. But eventually, the music's going to stop. Eventually, some idea that you thought was a good thing, somebody else does it. And I know that's not a direct parallel to the commercial world out there where you're creating a new widget and trying to outcompete. But you're all trying to make where you serve the best place it possibly can be. And if you are planning in the way that we mentioned, you will be stronger, better, more valuable, and that it benefits you, everybody you work with, all the people that you serve. So that's my last impassioned plea to say, maybe you've been on the fence about creating the new plan, and you're like, I got to get to that. We had some conversations at the booth about, we're about to restart our process. Hopefully this would be the jump start to make sure that you say, all right, that'll be something we explore on Monday. So I mentioned that this is the beginning of all things, but then how do we make it actually pragmatic? How do we take our good collection of ideas that you might have on your computer right now and make it into a plan that the translator can really make sing? And there are 5 elements, and these 5 have been the result of a lot of work over the years. We work not only with a lot of folks in Florida, but we work with a lot of federal agencies, NASA being one of them. I recently just concluded a tour of every single flight center in the United States, and it is pretty awe-inspiring to go to like Stennis Flight Center in Mississippi to see the rocket testing facility, or to go to Goddard Space Center where they created the Hubble telescope and the most recent one. It's just amazing. And they're literal rocket scientists. One person I emailed the other day, in their email signature or at the top of it, it said military astronaut. This is a person that we're working with. They're brilliant, no doubt. But when they looked at their plans, they were a mess. And they would be the first ones to mention it. And what I was doing is then helping them with these 5 things. Going through their plans and adding these 5 things in now makes them in a place where they're able to really keep an eye on their plans. And so it's not a reflection on anybody's ability. Sometimes this is the hard part. I mean, this is going line by line in your plan. And that sometimes is a little bit challenging, but it is time well spent. If you have these 5, your plan will be better. And the first one we have is quantitative outcomes. Anything in your plan that is a dollar, percentage, or number, they need to be in your plan. I've seen so many plans over the years that this is a huge part that's missing. The plans are typically a collection of to-do items. All the verbs are like implement, develop, deploy, all fantastic words, but I'm looking for words like increase, decrease, maintain. Those are the 3 words that if you're able to shoehorn it into the thing that you're tracking, it is actually quantifiable. If those words can't be shoehorned in or some synonym of those 3, then it's qualitative. And I'm not saying qualitative items aren't important. Your plan's going to be mostly qualitative. But you're not just doing things for the sake of doing it. Your hope is that you're doing a variety of wonderful things to impact something qualitative. And if that happens, that's a good year. If you're saying there's a particular number, percentage, or dollar that keeps you up at night, and due to these 3 things we did this year, those numbers have improved, that's a good day at the office. And so when you look at your plan, ask yourself, how many actual quantitative things do I have in there? I know I've basically estimated that your plan should be at least 20%, sometimes a little bit less, of quantitative measurements, and most of the time plans are not even near 20%. And so I know that we're going to be talking about Alachua County. They have performance measures. They are a good example of how to really implement that, and Donna's going to talk about that in a minute. You don't need 1,000 of these, by the way. Pick the critical few. What are the numbers, percentages, or dollars that tell the story? I've worked with hospitals out in the West Coast, and they went the opposite direction. And when you walk into their beautiful lobbies, hospitals on the West Coast they look like the Four Seasons. It's something a crazy phenomenon. But they have a big wall, like as big as this, of all the metrics that they track as a hospital. Community-acquired pneumonia, readmission rates, and I'm talking 40, 60 measures. There's no way you can make heads or tails of it. If I'm walking in, there's no way that means anything to me. So pick 3 to 5, 2 to 4, whatever it may be, and let those tell the story. And make sure that you have those in place so that when you're doing your plan retrospectives, which should happen pretty regularly, that you're having a more factual conversation rather than emotional. The emotional conversation, it sounds like I talked about before, look at all this stuff we got done. That's not the good indication of a plan being measured. It should be, we did these things and these measures moved in the right direction, therefore the plan was effective.
As it shows on the slide, that 65%, the 89%, and the bar chart, those are all actual graphs out of our performance management system. And as you say, what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets done, but only if you have the budget to do the work. So in Alachua County, it is so important for us to do this. We have a financial procedure as part of our annual budgeting process that mandates we provide performance management functions. So all of our performance measures are aligned with our strategic guide, and all of our performance measures are aligned with the assigned department that's responsible for those specific measures. We do require measures be reported on a quarterly basis. As Joe said, if you go much past a quarterly basis, you're not being able to affect change when a problem is easily identified. And that problem can get much worse before you're able to turn that ship around and start making change on a measure that's not doing what it should be doing. So not only do we have quantitative measures, but we also mandate qualitative measures. So for example, we had a tax referendum in 2022 that required an OPAGA audit. What am I going to track? The number of meetings I've completed? Am I going to track the number of documents submitted to the auditors? Am I going to put a yes or no at the end of it to say it was completed? No, I'm going to actually describe it as part of my budget process that in fiscal year 2022, we successfully completed the OPAGA audit. That's an incredibly important thing that we did. It's required by state statute, but it's not something that's easily measurable. So as an agency, we require both quantitative and qualitative measures.
Excellent. It's a combination of the two. Once again, equally important, but most of the time, probably 90% of the time, qualitative things are easier to develop. Quantitative items take a little bit more work, but they're worth the time. And you don't need 1 million of them, you need the critical few. The next one we touched upon, so we can kind of fly through it a little bit, is the idea of ownership. Either items fall into 2 categories. Very rarely is there 1 item per person without some conversation with the client. There's usually no owners. Sometimes it's just a blank cell in Excel, or there's too many. There's very rarely just the perfect example of just 1 person per item. And it's not to say that if you can't have multiple people have their name next to an item, but one has to be in bold, right? One person has to be the one that's making that monthly update or that quarterly update. You could have the other people's names there to really make sure they get the credit they're due because they are working on the project. The best way to describe it is, I'm sure you've all been to a conference like this where instead of the chairs like this, they're the little circles, right? The little round tables. And there's somebody up here like this saying, all right, for the next 20 minutes, we're going to do a breakout session. And at the end of 20 minutes, everybody's going to elect a representative from their table to explain what they did in the past hour. You as a group work together, come up with a solution, and you elect somebody from that table. Maybe it's the best speaker, maybe it's the person who did most of the work, but somebody has to stand up and announce. That's the same concept you're going to use for the plan. There may be 4 people working on it, but who's the one that is closest to the work, that if you were to ask them for an update, they can give you a color, red, yellow, green, and also some narrative related to that red, yellow, green. Narrative doesn't need to be a tale of two cities. It's typically 2 to 3 sentences on what happened last month and 2 to 3 sentences on what we're going to do next month. Every fire drill that we've probably experienced in our professional lives has usually been in the pursuit to find the answer to those 2 questions. Why is this thing the way it is, and what are you going to do about it? So if everybody has that understanding, and it's one person in this case, to write that out, it should hopefully make your phone ring a little bit less and have less emails with the big red exclamation mark because everything's high priority, right? So ultimately, ownership is something that is sounds easy, but sometimes it's hard. It's not a popularity contest. It's just a pragmatic thing where if you ask one person for an update, it is so much easier than asking 4. If it was easy to ask 4, then we'd have 4. It's not the case.
We have an assigned liaison to every one of our performance measures, and I'm proud to say that at this point within our internal quarterly deadlines, we have about a 95% response rate by that internal deadline of our 180 performance measures, and we have 100% compliance. Usually it takes me one follow-up email to those measures that are delinquent, and it's usually responded to within the next business day. And that is something that is very important to us because we do have that buy-in at the liaison level. And all of our managers, all of our department managers, all of our assistant and deputy managers, as well as our county manager, have access not only to the system, but to all of the dashboards. So they can very easily go in and scroll through all of our dashboards to see how we're progressing on our different strategic initiatives. Again, that communication is really important, all the way down to that individual assigned owner, that liaison. Everybody is involved in the process, but every measure has one assigned person.
You're always going to have at least 1 or 2 people that are delinquent with whatever process you put in there. But it's a lot easier to chase 1 or 2 people than to 50, 100, 200 people. So the goal here is to get a process that captures 90% of your group, and that other 10% will come along kicking and screaming. But to Donna's point, usually it's just an extra email saying, hey, where's your update? And they do it. So it's always going to be somebody that's raging against the machine, so to speak, but the hope is that it's a small number that's much more easily managed. Another one seems like it might be like, what are you talking about? Of course we need due dates. That's number 3. Every plan that I see, due dates are like non-existent. I'm talking about a due date either not being there or the second place one that I see a lot of, and hopefully not offending anybody. Everything's due at the end of the year. Everything we're working on, end of the year, end of the period of performance, whatever it is. If you have all of your due dates at the end of the year, it's in essence of having no due date, because there's no way that people are going to do that. We all remember the first day of school, the syllabus would be handed out, and at the end it'd say there's a final paper due in the last week of school. You think anybody started that thing until the week before? No. You go to the library, you can't find a seat that last week of the semester, right? It's this human nature. We will test the bounds of time and space, and we will procrastinate till the last second you allow me to. So the goal here is that a due date is in there, and I ultimately know that due dates are sometimes challenging. So the project management experience that I referenced, they talk a lot about that in the PMBOK, the Project Management Book of Knowledge. If you ever want to go to sleep, it's better than Ambien. It's perfect. It's like yay big, and I mean, it's just full of great anecdotes. But ultimately, they mention that due dates are a good way. The way to get due dates is sometimes you're working on something, you're like, I don't even know how long this is going to take. So the best idea is to ask somebody internally who maybe worked on a similar project and use their due date. And if they don't have anybody in your organization that has one, call out to some of your colleagues in your network to figure out if they've worked on something. And they'll tell you, it took me 6 months. Make it 7 for you, because that's the last piece, the idea of the planning fallacy. We, when we plan, and myself included, tend to have the rosiest picture of outcomes, right? If you're saying on Saturday, how long is it going to take me to run those errands I need to do? I have to stop at 4 places. About a half an hour, right? No red lights, parking right up front, nobody online, perfect, half an hour. You know it's not going to take a half an hour. So the goal here is to get a due date that is realistic, but also creates accountability. And if you can't pick a specific day of the year, like this needs to be done on May 12th, pick the end of a quarter at least. That's better than nothing. And as you get better with it, you can then make it a specific date. But absent of that, having everything at the end of the year is not doing you or people in the plan any favors, because they're just going to wait till the last moment. It's just that's how we're wired, myself included sometimes. So just know that having those there will allow for wonderful things to happen. And also start dates. Sometimes start dates are overlooked, right? Having a start date in there, especially if you're asking for monthly updates, ask that monthly update on the items that have started. I've seen many times where people are asking somebody for an update on 10 items and 7 of them haven't started. They start getting mad. Like, well, I didn't start on this yet. Why are you asking me? So if you have a start date in the future, reserve your asking until the start date has elapsed. Once again, seems simple, but it is something that is always omitted in most plans.
You know, as I've mentioned, we report our measures on a quarterly basis. Again, that consistency is really important within our organization. And again, all of our department directors, our managers, our liaisons, they all know that as soon as they put that measure into our performance reporting system, it automatically populates to the manager's dashboards. It automatically populates to the county's transparency webpage. And twice a year, that information is loaded into our budget document, which is reported to our county commissioners and published on our website. So they know like clockwork, consistently, every time they put a performance measure in the system, it's on the dashboard, it's on the transparency page. If it's late, everybody knows because it's not on the dashboard and it's not on the transparency page. They can't turn around and say, oh, well, Donna didn't upload it or so-and-so didn't activate it. It is automatic. That is very important because everybody from our liaisons up can look at that information in real time. That puts a little bit of a fire under them when we're going through our quarterly processes.
Nothing wrong with a little social pressure. It's great to have a system that would identify who did not make their updates, right? So sometimes we see who made their updates. Not the worst thing in the world to call out those who didn't make their updates. And once, if they're shown on that marquee in a way that makes them look a little bit foolish, because I tell people all the time, you do not have control over your items in your plan staying green all the time. You just don't. Your best ability is to hopefully identify a problem earlier and get out of it. But the only thing you truly have control over is making an update on time. So a lot of folks like really rally against this sometimes, like, I don't have time to make an update. Most of the time it takes less than a half an hour once a month to do this right. And so making sure that it's crystal clear that you can choose not to make your update, but all these reports are going to have your name on it, and you didn't make your update, that's going to have sketchy optics. So that usually gets people over the hump. And Donna touched upon it, but the idea of, okay, you have a year to do this, but I don't want to hear from you in a year. I want to hear from you monthly. And that's that whole idea of a cadence of accountability. It's one of the 4 disciplines of execution. And ultimately, how do you ensure that people know that at least on a monthly basis or sometimes quarterly, that they're going to be asked for a status update. They just can't wait till the end. And if you do this and it becomes part of your process, like Donna mentioned, ultimately good things happen again. So the goal here is that people understand what's working and what's not working, and they feel compelled on their monthly check-in to tell the truth. So it is your job as leaders to be very clear about what red, yellow, and green mean. And they have different numbers, right? Different meanings. Green means life is good. Green means that I am trending in a position where if everything goes the way I expect and the way it's going, I'm going to meet my deadline, I'm going to meet my due date. Yellow means danger ahead. I think we can get it back to green, but if we don't fix this now, it's going to easily become red. So you're kind of raising your hand like this. Red means we have a problem, all right? We need to talk about this first. And if you do this effectively, you now have a standing agenda for all strategic plan review meetings going forward. Reds go first, then yellows, and then always allocate time at the end to celebrate green. Because if people don't feel like they're being appreciated for the stuff that is going well, then they're not going to do it either. So the goal here, though, is if we only have an hour together, we can't go around the room and ask everybody for everything. Reds, yellows, greens, in that order. The Cleveland Clinic, one of the best hospitals on the planet Earth, they meet weekly to discuss green items amongst different department heads. Head of neurology will talk to the cardiology group, and there'll be some overlap about what's working, but they share good ideas. So that's the essence here, is that your strategic plan will have more good than bad. Make sure you highlight that. And last but not least, alignment. Making sure that the items in your plan, everything actually has a place. It's not a bunch of stuff just floating out in space. There has to be a structure. There has to be a hierarchy in your plan that you follow, and that hierarchy has to be understood by the people who are following it. And Donna's going to speak to you in a moment what the level she has and how that's worked. But this goes back to that study I mentioned earlier. If you do this effectively, there's a 73% chance of your work getting done. The hierarchy has to be simple. It can't be any more than 6 levels unless you have a really good reason for it. It has to be understood. I had a client that had 15 levels in their plan. I'm like, absolutely not. Absolutely not. It was good. And they tried to defend it, but they realized it was too complex. The goal here is that every level you have in your plan has to have a meaning for existing, has to have an easily defined definition, and it always starts from your broadest level down to your most specific. And Donna has an example of her hierarchy right here on the right-hand screen. This is actually her plan.
Yes, so in this example, this focus area has to do with public safety. So we basically provide for public safety. Our objective is to provide the resources necessary to meet fire prevention and protection, including law enforcement and a number of other things. And then we have a specific measure having to do with medical transports. So what's important for us, and I've mentioned this, we align in two different ways. All of our measures are aligned to the department that they're assigned to. That way we know who to hold accountable when things aren't going correctly, and where they align to with regard to the budget dollars, which is always important to know. But also, we align to each of the focus areas, because while you think of typically public safety being your fire and rescue departments, what else is included in public safety? It could be your building inspections. In Alachua County, we provide animal services, so it's measures related to dangerous dogs. It could be water quality issues, it could be petroleum management, or anything else that relates to the general safety of the public. It's not only limited to fire rescue. So we both report at a department level, but we also report at that focus area, that overall public safety level, so that when our board is allocating budget dollars to public safety, we also generate this report up here, and I apologize, it's not on the charts. I do have a copy here if you want to look at it later. But we provide a report back at the end of each year showing how the board has actually allocated their budget dollars with regard to their 5 strategic focus areas. So in this case, they know that they provided 18% of their budget in the board operating departments was provided to public safety, whereas only 2% was provided to housing. So again, where your budget money is truly where your strategy is. And it's important for your board not only to create that plan in words, but to allocate the budget to that. And part of our process is the alignment of all of our operational measures to the board's focus areas, so that the board can see where they're focusing their budget at. You know, is that budget following their words?
That's fantastic. And just as a reminder, the 5 elements are all there. If you went to your plan on Monday and applied these 5, you'd be in a much better position to execute at a much higher level. So when we talked about the pragmatic, this is as pragmatic as it gets. I'm talking going line by line with the people in the room that can make the decisions on this. It's usually takes the better part of the day, but it's a day well spent, because this means that when you walk out, your plan is ready to be executed at a high level. And as we transition, now we're going to make sure we spend most of our time on the actual Alachua County story, and Donna's going to take it from here.
So just to give you a little background on Alachua County, we have 16 identified operational departments. We have no less than 15 physical locations. We have 58 contributors to our strategic plan. And in 2021, we started a brand new strategic planning process. One thing that I will highly recommend is when you are doing your strategic planning process to hire an experienced consultant to do that for you. As the person who's the translator, I don't want to be the person that's perceived as guiding the board's strategic direction when I'm the one who has to implement that, because there is always going to be a department or an operation that is not specifically called out in the strategic plan. It's not that they're not important, it's just not part of that legacy project that the board wants to focus their budget on going forward. So again, our history in Alachua County is that, and I've been there about 16 years, when I started there, we had performance measures. We had them everywhere. We had state mandated performance measures. We had stuff that I swear when I asked them why we report that, they said that's because that's what we've always done. How many of you have heard that? That's what we've always done, so that's why we're reporting it. And I'd say, well, why? What value does it add? What are you using that information for? We had management measures, we had contractual measures, we had grant-related measures. We had measures everywhere. And a lot of acronyms in the measures, I have to say. So what did we do? We filtered through, we basically culled the entire list of publicly reported performance measures. we went from 350 performance measures down to about 150 performance measures in one cycle. And I want to say that was in 2016, 2017. We also had a strategic guide that went into effect in 2014 that we had basically done nothing with. So one of the things we did when we went through our performance measure culling process, we aligned all of our performance measures to that strategic guide, and we identified strategic guide areas that maybe had too many measures, where they were getting lost in the shuffle. And then we had some strategic guide areas that only had 4 performance measures across the entire organization. So as essentially the translator, those were the departments that I went out to, and I worked specifically with them to identify measures that supported the board's strategic guide. We also had very early implementation of our program with our super users. So there are those really star performers in each department that you just knew you could rely on to give you really good constructive feedback on how you were doing your alignment, how things were being reported back to the public, and how we were reporting to management. Those early adopters and our super users were important to that successful buy-in of our entire strategic planning process. And through that process, again, we hired the consultant to help our board with the strategic guide. Then we got rid of the consultant and we pulled it all in-house because we wanted that adoption by our users to understand the alignment, the reasons, the importance, why we culled the measures. We're now up to about 190 measures. So since 2017 to 2023, we've added about 40 measures because we had identified gaps. We had developed new programs. We had been awarded new grants. Whatever it was, there was an importance in that process to establish those new measures and report those out to the public. So if we look at this chart here, this basically here is our board strategic guide. Really high-level 32,000-foot focus. These are our operational performance. Again, we have about 190 performance measures we report publicly, but we have many, many more measures that our management uses internally. And then this is what I say, this is really where the rubber hits the road. Basically where we're aligning our board's direction with our operational outcomes. How do those align? How are they showing that we're meeting that direction that the board has given us? This is also essentially where your budget dollars go. I kind of joke about that kind of funnel and that narrowing because you know what? We don't have enough money for everything we want to accomplish. We have programs that aren't on our strategic guide that we still do because they're important to our community. For example, our animal services department. There is nowhere on our strategic guide you will see us talk about animal services. But it's important to our community, and we're not just going to throw it out because it's not on the strategic guide. But then when we come to issues like public safety and housing, how do we allocate those remaining dollars based on the board's direction? So this here is policy direction, it's budget allocation, it's management. This is really where everything occurs within your organization. So this is our new strategic guide. This was worked on starting in 2021. We did have a consultant come in and help us. Our 5 focus areas are housing, social and economic opportunity, environment, infrastructure, and public safety. And then within each of those are our board objectives. We also have a category called all other mandatory and discretionary services. That would be like where my function is. I'm a discretionary service in the Budget and Fiscal Services Department, but I'm a discretionary service that our board chooses to allocate funding to. Animal services is largely discretionary. Things like actually producing a balanced budget is mandated by state statute. But again, producing a balanced budget is nowhere in these 5 strategic focus areas, but we still have to do it. So that falls under our all other mandatory category. Again, this is a nice, pretty chart, nice, colorful, looks good. We publish it in our budget document. But at the end of the day, where our Board of County Commissioners allocates their budget and what our staff do with that budget is where our strategy execution occurs. Very important for everybody to understand that. So as I mentioned, in our strategic performance reporting system, we do report on all of our 5 focus areas and our mandatory and discretionary programs that don't fall under one of those 5 areas. And the thing that I really like about this is that from a translator standpoint, or even from the architect standpoint, this gives you a really good summary of how your operations are running. As Joe mentioned, we've got greens, which is everything's going good. We're meeting our target, we're on track. Yellows, maybe we're on a downward trajectory and we need to improve it. Maybe we've fallen a little bit below our target and we need to improve it. This is cautionary. Our reds we're just not cutting it. We are absolutely not cutting it, and we need to do something to right the ship. And again, I want to stress that in our performance management program, we absolutely communicate regularly that this is not a punitive process. Just because you have reds in the reporting system does not mean you're going to get in trouble for it. We want you to evaluate what those reds are, what's causing it. One of our biggest areas when we went red was during COVID. We weren't doing community outreach. We weren't installing smoke alarms in houses. Our parks weren't open. We were essentially doing no outreach, no interaction with our public. A lot of our measures went red. So repeatedly, our department said, due to the impacts of COVID, X, Y, and Z. And they explained it. That is part of the management process, is not only meeting your targets, but when you're not meeting your target, understanding what the factors are that are causing your target not to be met. Is it because of external things like COVID? Is it because of internal things, staffing, budgeting, change in legislative statutes that impact our operation? Those are all things that are important to report and to communicate to management. And then the other thing I like here is there's a little number 2 here that's orange. Those are my delinquent reporters. So I know specifically, I can go to that number 2 and I know that 2 people didn't report on time for that quarter. I can then reach out to them specifically. Did they have a death in the family and they've just been out of the office for 2 weeks? Did they change a computer system? What is it that caused that measure to be late? And if I can help them, I will help them. Again, early buy-in, early adoption, super users, those are all important to getting this work done. So here is specifically our measures related to our public safety focus area. So in this case, I know we're mostly doing greens, got some yellows, we've got some reds. And in this case, the purple is everybody who's reported on time, and my one little delinquent public safety measure actually has to do with a measure that's reported after an audit. We didn't get the audit in time. Our measure didn't get reported in time. That's as simple as that one was. But it was something that I could follow up on and find out what was going on. This goes back to the 5 elements. You've got the measure, you've got our status, we've got some greens and reds on this chart. What's the start date? What are our due dates? Again, all of ours are reported quarterly. We've got our target. What are they trying to achieve the last time it was updated? Importantly, who is it assigned to? And then I can look in here, like here's rescue medical. This one is petroleum management. We've got emergency management. Here's animal resources. So I know exactly who the assigned department is if I need to follow up on any one of these reds. And again, this is our really detailed chart. This is not our dashboard chart. This, however, is one of our dashboards. So again, staying in line of public safety, what we do for these measures is we report in these specific cases, these are cumulative year to date, so we can actually see how we're progressing through the year. This blue line here is our target. It increases every year because we know that our population is increasing and our population is aging. So we know that our medical responses and our medical transports are going to increase over time, and we're able to track that. Why is this important to us? Why do you think this chart is important to us when it comes to public safety for both responses and transports? This is important to us because it helps us determine when we need to budget for new crews and new vehicles to respond to the needs of our citizens. So at various points in this threshold target, we then approach our board and ask for new vehicles and new rescue or fire response units. Very important to us to be able to show that to our management. When we first started tracking these numbers and reporting back to our Board of County Commissioners, when our board determined how delinquent and deficient we were in our response unit, within 1 year, they approved us for 4 critical care rescue units to bring us back into correct margins for both response times and responses per vehicle. That was unheard of for 4 units to be approved in 1 year. So here's one of our reds, and you can see we have consistent reds. This is for our rescue units. This is our response time that's based on a national standard response time. So in our urban area, we are supposed to respond to rescue calls within 6 minutes or less, 80% of the time. Where were we at on our last reporting cycle? We were at less than 36%. The time before that was 33%, and the time before that, I think, was 38%. So we are consistently not meeting our target. So what did we do after we evaluated this measure? We made an agency decision that we were going to pay for an incredibly large operational performance audit. We brought in consultants. They are currently working on the draft as we speak. They are evaluating every operational component of both our fire and our rescue operations to determine why we are consistently not meeting our standards. What can we do to make that better? You know, we've put 4 new rescue units in less than 5 years ago. We've got critical care units that are operating during peak call load times. Why are we consistently not meeting our measures? You know, when you talk about that golden hour when you have a stroke or heart attack, if we're not responding in 6 minutes and getting you to the hospital as soon as possible, that is negatively impacting our citizens, and we need to correct this number. So we've, huge investment, $300,000 investment on an audit that's hopefully going to come back with a lot of recommendations on how we can make our fire rescue department better. And a lot of that was geared off of our red measures in our public safety units. And then we also look, again, I've mentioned a lot, your budget is really where the rubber hits the road. But whenever we put in budget requests or budget enhancement requests, we do ask that they align their enhancement request with the strategic focus area that it supports. We also report all of that in our budget document. We also require it in our agenda process. So you can see here the strategic guide area is infrastructure, social and economic opportunity. The alignment of what we do to our strategic guide is absolutely pervasive in our entire organization, from budgeting, agenda items, from our board, all the way down to our clerical staff. Everybody knows where their piece fits into our strategic guide. And just to kind of toot my own horn a little bit here, I know we're doing something right because we have been recognized by the ICMA with the Strategic Performance Award of Excellence. I want to say for 6 or 7 years running. The last time it was awarded was in 2021, and they're revamping the process, and we hope to get it again when they restart that process, hopefully later this year. And then in, I think it was our 2020 budget year, we were also recognized by the Government Finance Officers Association with our Special Performance Measures recognition. So being, evaluated by independent organizations that say we're doing a good job in our performance management and performance reporting process was very important to us, and it was something that our board definitely appreciated to show that they are also supporting doing the right thing. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over to Joe to close us out.
Yep, no, we're at time. So ultimately, the performance management system that was referenced just at the end here is called AchieveIt. It's the company name. We had a booth there before. And ultimately, we are all about helping do all the things that were mentioned before, helping you track, monitor, and execute the plan. We have a lot of folks that we work with in Florida directly, and some of the logos you see in the bottom right-hand corner are a sampling of our client base. But ultimately, federal, state, local, counties, you name it. We help you finalize your plan, build your plan, and also use our software to track, monitor, and execute it, very similar to what Donna showed earlier. Those dashboards, those status reports, that's what we do. That's what we are here to do. And if that was something you'd be interested in, My colleague Amanda Sear here is going to be passing out some capabilities flyers at the back there, or if you are so inclined, you can scan the QR code and schedule time to connect with Amanda. But the goal here is that we work with a lot of your colleagues. We do a lot of this work every day, and if this is something you're struggling with, especially the tracking and execution of your plan, give us a ring, and we'd be happy to chat with you. But I do appreciate the time you've invested on a Friday afternoon. Hopefully the goal of the learning objective was pragmatic advice that you can use on Monday. By show of hands, do people feel like they have good pragmatic advice that they can use on Monday? Oh, thank God. Oh, okay, good. Excellent. And I thank you, Donna, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be here to do this. This is always a lot of work to get ready and to perform, but the goal here is that we were able to share a good story that you can use in your organizations. If you want to learn more, you can chat with me. I'll be at Topgolf later, you name it. I'm here to help, but appreciate you all, and I hope you have a great rest of the conference.